Imagine dedicating your entire life to a child, facing unimaginable hardships, making silent sacrifices, just to see them grow and achieve their dreams. That was the journey of Delores Jordan, a strong, determined woman who never gave up, even in the darkest moments. But what she didn't know was that her son, Michael Jordan, hadn't forgotten any of it. Today, she is about to experience one of the most surprising and emotional moments of her life. But before that, she will face something she never imagined, a humiliation that will deeply touch the heart of anyone watching. What will happen when the truth comes to light? Stay until the end, because this story will move you. The autumn sun cast golden reflections on the leaves dancing in the Chicago wind. Michael Jordan gazed out the window of his private office, absent-mindedly spinning a basketball between his fingers. The familiar feel of the leather against his fingertips had an almost meditative effect, allowing his mind to drift through distant yet vivid memories. "Are you sure you want to do this now, Mr. Jordan?" asked Thomas, his real estate advisor, interrupting his thoughts. The impeccably dressed man held a black leather folder containing the documents for the most significant purchase Michael would ever make in his life. Michael placed the basketball on the table and turned around, determination in his eyes. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life, Thomas. She deserves this, and so much more." Thomas nodded respectfully. After years of working with celebrities and high-profile athletes, he was rarely surprised by the extravagances and whims of his clients. But there was something different about this particular purchase. It wasn't just another mansion to add to a sports star's real estate collection. It was a gesture full of meaning. "All the papers are ready. The property now officially belongs to Delores Jordan," Thomas announced, extending a golden pen for Michael to sign the final document. Michael took the pen, but hesitated for a moment, his eyes fixed on his mother's name printed on the document. A slight smile formed on his lips as he signed with the same fluidity he used when autographing jerseys for fans. "She has no idea what's coming," Michael said, more to himself than to Thomas. 3 weeks later, Michael was driving his Mercedes down the highway leading to the elegant suburbs outside Chicago. Beside him in the passenger seat, Delores Jordan looked out the window curiously. "Michael, are you going to tell me where we're going, or do I have to guess the whole way?" she asked in that tone only mothers can master, a perfect mix of authority and affection. Michael smiled without taking his eyes off the road. "Mom, if I tell you, it won't be a surprise anymore, will it?" Delores adjusted the light blue scarf around her neck, a gift Michael had brought her from one of his international trips. She was eager to know when her beloved son's present would be for her. As he drove, Michael couldn't help but steal occasional glances at his mother. Delores was as elegant as ever, even in a simple pants and blazer outfit. At 81 years old, she still carried that dignity and strength that had always defined her, even in the hardest moments of their lives. The car turned onto a tree-lined street with grand, spaced-out houses on both sides. Michael felt his heart race. It was close. 3 months of secret planning, discreet meetings with real estate agents, and countless little white lies to keep everything under wraps were about to pay off. "This neighborhood is beautiful," Delores commented, admiring the well-kept gardens and clean streets. "Did a friend of yours move here?" "Something like that," Michael replied vaguely. As he slowed the car, Michael's mind traveled back in time. He saw himself as a child again, watching his mother come home after a long day of work. He remembered how she patched up his old shirts when there was no money to buy new ones, how she always made his favorite snack on game days, even when she was exhausted, how she lit a small candle every night, praying for his protection. The house where Michael Jordan grew up in North Carolina was far from a palace, small, with a leaky roof during summer storms and a heating system that mercilessly failed in the harshest winters. But Delores always said, "It doesn't matter if the roof leaks as long as there's love under it." And love was never lacking in that house. Michael remembered one particular night when he was 14. He had woken up thirsty in the middle of the night and found his mother sitting at the kitchen table under the dim glow of a lamp, sewing his school uniform that had torn during a backyard basketball game. Her hands moved with precision despite the deep, dark circles under her eyes. When he asked why she wasn't sleeping, she simply replied, "Some things can't wait until tomorrow, Michael. And you're one of them." That image never left him, not even when he was signing million-dollar contracts or lifting trophies in front of ecstatic crowds. "Michael, are you okay?" Dolores's voice brought him back to the present. "I'm fine, Mom. Just thinking." "Thinking about what?" "About how life comes full circle," he answered, smoothly parking the car in front of an elegant wrought iron gate. Delores looked out the window, puzzled. In front of her stretched out a magnificent property. The entrance pathway, lined with perfectly trimmed trees, led to a two-story Georgian house with white columns and tall windows. To the right, a lush garden displayed an impressive variety of flowers in full bloom, creating a mosaic of colors that looked like something out of a Monet painting. "Who lives here?" Delores asked, visibly impressed by the beauty of the place. Michael turned off the engine and took a deep breath. "For now, no one." Delores gave him a curious look as he got out of the car and walked around to open her door. Offering his arm, Michael led his mother along the stone pathway to the grand entrance. Thomas, the realtor, was waiting at the door with a professional smile. Seeing Michael and Delores approaching, he discreetly nodded, following his instructions exactly. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Jordan. It's a pleasure to finally meet you," he said, extending his hand. "Michael has told me so much about you." Delores shook his hand, still unsure of the purpose of their visit. "The pleasure is mine, Mr. Thomas Wilson from Exclusive Properties," he introduced himself. "I'm here to show you the property." "Property?" Delores turned to Michael with raised eyebrows. "Are you buying another house, son?" Michael shrugged with a mysterious smile. "Just checking out some options. Shall we go in?" Thomas opened the massive front door, revealing an impressive hall with a marble floor and a crystal chandelier that cast a golden glow over the space. Dolores's reaction was immediate. A quiet gasp escaped her lips as her eyes took in every detail. "It's, extraordinary," she murmured. As Thomas guided them through the house, Michael carefully observed every reaction from his mother. He knew her well enough to tell when something truly impressed her, despite her usual restraint. And it was clear, this house had captured her heart. The spacious living room, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the gardens, brought a special sparkle to her eyes. The cherrywood-paneled library with bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling elicited a comment about how wonderful it would be to store all the books she had collected over the years. But it was the kitchen that provoked the most revealing reaction. Spacious, with granite countertops, state-of-the-art stainless steel appliances, and a central island perfect for gathering the family. It was the dream of anyone who loved cooking, and Delores did. "This kitchen," she whispered, running her hand gently over the granite countertop. "Remember how I always said that if I ever had my dream kitchen, it would have an island like this? Big enough for all the grandkids to sit around while I baked cookies." Michael felt a lump form in his throat. That was precisely why he had chosen this house in particular, out of the dozens they had visited. The moment he saw that kitchen, he knew his mother would love it. Sensing the emotional moment, Thomas discreetly stepped away into the adjacent room, giving them some privacy. "It's perfect, isn't it?" Michael said, watching his mother explore every corner of the kitchen with childlike fascination. "Perfect doesn't even begin to describe it," she replied, opening and closing drawers like a kid in a toy store. "Whoever lives here is going to be very happy." The back porch was another highlight of the tour. Spacious with elegant and comfortable outdoor furniture, it offered a panoramic view of the meticulously maintained gardens. A small artificial pond with a family of ducks swimming peacefully completed the idyllic scene. "I can imagine family dinners out here on summer evenings," Delores said, her voice soft and thoughtful. "Imagine your grandkids running through these gardens, chasing the ducks." Michael smiled. "It would be perfect." Thomas reappeared discreetly. "Would you like to see the upstairs now? The bedrooms are just as impressive." Delores looked at Michael, who nodded encouragingly. As they ascended the central staircase, Michael felt anticipation building. The master bedroom was the pièce de résistance of the house, and he had made some special modifications, anticipating his mother's reaction. The master bedroom was indeed something out of a movie. Spacious, with a king-size bed positioned strategically to catch the morning light, a gas fireplace, and a walk-in closet that would make any fashion lover envious. But the true highlight was the ensuite bathroom, featuring a soaking tub positioned next to a window overlooking the gardens. "A bathtub like this," Dolores whispered, almost as if speaking to herself. "Do you remember, Michael? How I always said my dream was to have a bathtub where I could soak after a long day at work, with bath salts and candles." Michael remembered perfectly. Throughout his childhood, the only bathroom in their home had a small shower with unreliable water pressure. His mother had often mentioned, without ever really complaining, how luxurious it would be to relax in a tub after an exhausting day. "I remember every word, Mom," he replied, his voice betraying the emotion he was trying to contain. Thomas showed them the rest of the bedrooms, each with its own bathroom, all elegantly decorated. There was one that seemed perfect for an office, another that could easily become a guest room, and yet another that would be ideal for a child's bedroom. By the time they returned to the grand entrance hall, Dolores was visibly moved by the experience. "It's a wonderful house, son. The person you're recommending it to will love it." Michael exchanged a knowing glance with Thomas. "Actually, Mom, I've already bought this house." "Oh," Dolores looked surprised. "So it's for you? I thought you were happy with your current mansion." "It's not for me," Michael replied, a mysterious smile playing on his lips. Dolores frowned in confusion. "Then, who is it for?" The moment had arrived. Michael felt his heart hammering against his chest. Thomas, following the meticulously rehearsed plan, discreetly handed Michael an envelope and stepped outside, leaving mother and son alone in the impressive entryway. Michael held on to the envelope for a moment, gathering courage. Everything he wanted to say, all the words he had rehearsed, suddenly seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of what he was about to do. "Michael?" Dolores watched him with growing curiosity. "Mom," he began, his voice deeper than usual. "Do you remember when I was a kid, and you told me that one day I'd be someone important? That everyone would know my name?" Dolores smiled, her eyes shining with memories. "Of course I remember. But you've always been important, Michael. Always." Michael felt the lump in his throat tighten. "You worked tirelessly to make sure I had decent sneakers to play in. You slept only 4 hours a night just so you could watch my games. You sacrificed everything for me." "I did what any mother would do," she replied simply, but the emotion in her voice was undeniable. "No, Mom, you did so much more." Michael took a deep breath, fighting back the tears threatening to surface. "For years, I saw you admire beautiful houses in magazines. I heard you talk about how nice it would be to have a garden where you could plant your own flowers, a kitchen big enough for the whole family to gather, a porch where you could sip your afternoon tea." Dolores watched her son, an expression of confusion slowly transforming into something else, a faint understanding of what might be coming. "I promised myself when I signed my first contract that one day I would give you everything you deserve," Michael continued. "Everything you ever dreamed of." With slightly trembling hands, he extended the envelope to his mother. "This is just the beginning of my thank you for everything you are." Dolores took the envelope cautiously, as if she were afraid of its contents. Slowly, she opened it and pulled out the documents inside. Her eyes scanned the first few lines and then widened in shock. "Michael, this is the deed to the house," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. "In your name. This house is yours, Mom. Every brick, every flower in the garden, every piece of furniture was chosen especially for you." Dolores looked at the papers in her hands, then at the house around her, and finally at her son. Her lips trembled, unable to form words. "I know it's not the same as you putting a roof over my head all those years," Michael continued, the words pouring out now as if they had been waiting decades to be spoken. "I know no house, no matter how big or beautiful, can repay your love. But I want you to have everything, Mom. Everything you always deserved and never asked for yourself." The silence that followed seemed to carry the weight of all the struggles, sacrifices, and victories shared between mother and son over the years. A silence filled with history, unconditional love, and a gratitude impossible to fully express in words or gestures. And then, just when the silence seemed ready to stretch on forever, something unexpected happened. The doorbell rang, echoing through the entry hall, startling both Michael and Dolores. "Ah, that must be Mr. Richardson," Michael commented, discreetly tucking the envelope with the deed into the inner pocket of his suit. Delores had not yet seen the name on the document, as the revelation had been interrupted before she could fully process what was happening. Who? Delores asked, quickly wiping away a tear that had escaped. The real estate sales manager, Michael explained, adjusting his posture. He insisted on being present to finalize some details. I didn't know he'd be here this early. Thomas, the real estate agent, entered hurriedly, looking slightly uncomfortable. Mr. Jordan, I apologize for the interruption, but Mr. Richardson has just arrived. He insisted on speaking with you personally. Michael nodded, exchanging a meaningful look with Thomas. This wasn't the original plan. The revelation was supposed to happen without interruptions, in an intimate moment between mother and son. But Michael knew from experience that plans rarely survive contact with reality. Let him in, Thomas, Michael instructed, turning to his mother with a reassuring smile. This will only take a minute. Thomas hesitated for a moment before opening the door. Through it stepped a middle-aged man dressed in a pristine navy blue suit that seemed tailor-made for his lean physique. The gray at his temples was perfectly groomed, and his face bore the kind of artificial tan that suggested hours spent in expensive salons. Mr. Jordan, the newcomer exclaimed, flashing a calculatedly warm smile as he extended his hand. Victor Richardson, Executive Director of Exclusive Properties. What an honor to finally meet you in person. Michael shook his hand, noting the overly firm grip, the kind insecure men use to assert dominance. Mr. Richardson, he responded politely, I wasn't expecting you today. How could I miss the opportunity to personally finalize the biggest real estate deal of the year? Richardson laughed, a hollow sound that didn't reach his eyes, especially when it involves the great Michael Jordan. His gaze then landed on Delores, who stood a few steps behind Michael. Richardson's smile faltered for the briefest moment. And this lady is, he asked, his tone subtly shifting. This is my mother, Delores Jordan, Michael introduced, placing a protective arm around Delores' shoulders. Mom, this is Victor Richardson. Richardson gave a small bow that bordered on condescension. Ah, the mother of Michael Jordan. What a pleasure, Mrs. Jordan, Delores finished with dignity. Delores Jordan. Of course, Mrs. Jordan. Richardson smiled again, though with noticeably less enthusiasm. Turning back to Michael, he continued, So what does Mrs. Jordan think of the property? Does she approve of her famous son's new acquisition? There was something in the way he emphasized certain words, something in how his eyes barely lingered on Delores before returning to Michael, that changed the air in the room almost instantly. Actually, Michael began, we were just in the middle of... It's a lovely house, Delores interrupted politely. Very beautiful indeed. Richardson shot her a quick glance, as if surprised that she had an opinion. Well, thank you. Naturally, this is a top-tier property. We have a very selective clientele. He paused meaningfully. Not just anyone can appreciate or afford a residence of this quality. Michael felt his mother stiffen slightly under his arm. He knew that sign. Delores Jordan might have been the kindest woman in the world, but she had an unfailing radar for detecting condescension. I imagine so, Delores replied calmly. Fortunately, my son can. Richardson laughed, a dry barking sound. Obviously, the legendary Michael Jordan, the greatest of all time. He patted Michael on the shoulder as if they were old friends. But let me show you some details that Thomas might not have highlighted, details that someone of Mr. Jordan's caliber would truly appreciate. Before Michael could object, Richardson was already leading them back into the living room. Take a look at the woodwork on these baseboards, he began, pointing out decorative details. Imported wood from Europe, crafted by fifth-generation artisans. Not something you find in ordinary homes. As he spoke, Richardson subtly positioned himself between Michael and Delores, directing his remarks exclusively to the basketball star. And these curtains? Hand-woven Thai silk. Cost more than some cars, he chuckled at his own joke. But when you can, why not, right? Delores stepped back, watching the interaction with a cautious expression. Michael noticed the movement and tried to position himself beside his mother, but Richardson continued maneuvering through the room, ostentatiously pointing out expensive, exclusive features. The sound system is fully integrated. You can control everything from your smartphone. I'm sure your son can help you understand how it works, ma'am, Richardson commented, casting a patronizing glance at Delores. It's quite advanced. It was the first time he had addressed her directly, and the tone did not go unnoticed. Actually, Delores responded calmly, I was the one who set up Michael's entire entertainment system at home. I've always had a knack for technology. Richardson raised his eyebrows in exaggerated surprise. Impressive. You don't see many ladies of your generation so comfortable with technology. Michael felt his jaw tighten. The "your generation" had been delivered in a tone that made it clear Richardson was, at the very least, being ageist. But before he could say anything, Richardson had already moved on to the kitchen. And here we have the true heart of the home, he announced grandly. Professional-grade appliances, Italian marble countertops, only the best. Perfect for a private chef. I imagine you have one, don't you, Michael? My mother is the best cook I know, Michael responded firmly. I never needed a chef when I could have her cooking. Richardson smiled condescendingly. Of course, homemade food has its charm, but a kitchen like this deserves a trained professional. It would be like giving a Ferrari to someone who's only ever driven economy cars, wouldn't it? He laughed again, looking expectantly at Michael as if they shared a private joke. The look he received in return should have warned him, but Richardson seemed oblivious to subtleties. Shall we take a look at the garden now? Delores suggested, clearly trying to shift the increasingly tense atmosphere. Ah, yes, the garden, Richardson agreed with false enthusiasm. As they walked outside, he slowed his pace to fall slightly behind with Delores, allowing Michael and Thomas to move a few steps ahead. You know, Mrs. Jordan, he said in a low voice, still maintaining a plastic smile, it's truly admirable to see how proud you are of your son. It must be surreal for someone like you to be in an environment like this. Delores looked him straight in the eyes. What do you mean, someone like me? Richardson shrugged with feigned casualness. Well, from what I understand, Michael came from rather modest beginnings. Wilmington, wasn't it? A nursing assistant, if I'm not mistaken. It must feel like stepping into another world. There was something in the way he emphasized modest in assistant that made Dolores's blood boil, but decades of life had taught her to maintain composure in uncomfortable situations. I believe a person's worth isn't measured by the size of their house, Mr. Richardson. The man smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Noble thought, typically maternal, but in this world, he gestured broadly at the luxurious property. Worth is precisely what matters, and estates like this are for people who have reached a certain level. Thomas, who had moved closer again, cleared his throat uncomfortably, clearly sensing the direction of the conversation. Mr. Richardson, perhaps we should show them the fountain in the back garden? It's one of the property's highlights. Excellent idea, Richardson agreed, turning his attention to Michael. You'll love the fountain, Michael. Imported from Italy. The previous owner spent a small fortune on it alone. As they walked through the meticulously maintained garden, Richardson continued his monologue about the cost and exclusivity of each feature. Michael watched his mother from the corner of his eye. He recognized that expression, a mix of dignity and discomfort. It was the same expression she had when, during his youth, certain parents of other players made veiled comments about how a boy like him had managed to make the private school team. And this area here, Richardson continued, pointing to an open space in the garden, would be perfect for events. I imagine in your position, Michael, you often entertain important people, celebrities, athletes, business leaders. My family is important to me, Michael replied curtly. Richardson waved dismissively. Of course, of course. Family is essential, but you know what I mean. People in your circle. Those who naturally fit in a place like this. Delores took a small step back, subtly distancing herself from the group. Michael noticed the movement and felt a pang in his heart. He knew that gesture. It was what his mother did when she felt out of place, when she wanted to become invisible. You know, Richardson continued, seemingly oblivious to the growing tension, all the neighbors here are people of, let's say, a certain level. CEOs, celebrities, heirs, an extremely exclusive community. No crime, no undesirable elements. He shot a quick glance at Delores before turning back to Michael. You understand what I mean? Michael understood perfectly, and his gaze darkened dangerously. Actually, Mr. Richardson, I don't think I do, he said, his voice low and controlled, but with an intensity that made Thomas instinctively take a step back. Why don't you clarify exactly what you mean by undesirable elements? Richardson blinked, finally sensing that something was wrong, but lacking the awareness to pinpoint exactly what. Oh, people who don't fit the neighborhood profile, he hesitated, searching for words. People without enough refinement. It would be uncomfortable for them, you see, and for the established residents. Uncomfortable, Michael repeated slowly. Like it would be uncomfortable for my mother? Richardson paled slightly. That's not what I meant. Absolutely not. Your mother is, well, she's your mother, of course. He tried a conciliatory smile. I was simply commenting on how this neighborhood maintains certain standards. Standards, Delores echoed, her voice soft but firm. Based on what exactly, Mr. Richardson? The man visibly began to sweat. Well, on social status, obviously, purchasing power, refinement, things that are important for maintaining property values. And you don't think I have enough refinement? Delores asked directly, her eyes fixed on his. Richardson swallowed hard, looking to Michael as if seeking help. He found only an icy stare. I certainly didn't mean to suggest that, Mrs. Jordan. I was merely providing context for your son. As a professional, it's my duty to ensure my clients fully understand where they're investing. And you think I don't understand where my son is investing? Dolores's voice now had a sharp edge, though she kept it low and controlled. Do you think I don't recognize when I'm being judged for not belonging somewhere? Richardson looked around, like a cornered animal. Mrs. Jordan, there's been a misunderstanding. You were perfectly clear, Delores interrupted. And don't worry, I've dealt with men like you my entire life. She turned to Michael, an unshakable dignity in her posture, despite the evident hurt in her eyes. Michael, dear, I think I've seen enough. Can we leave? Michael didn't answer immediately. His expression was frozen in a mask of controlled fury. For a moment, Richardson looked genuinely afraid, as if he suddenly remembered that he wasn't just provoking an elderly woman, but her son, a man known for his competitive intensity and his ability to never forget an offense. Mr. Jordan, Richardson tried, now visibly nervous, I assure you no offense was intended. I'm simply doing my job, ensuring that all aspects of the property are properly presented. Your job, Michael repeated slowly, includes making my mother feel like less than the queen she is? Richardson turned even paler. Absolutely not. This was a terrible misunderstanding. There was no misunderstanding, Michael replied, his voice dangerously calm. You made it perfectly clear what you think. And you know what's most ironic, Mr. Richardson? He took a step forward, closing the distance between them. You spent the last 20 minutes trying to impress me, trying to connect with me as if we were equals. But you would never, not for a second, be good enough to shine my mother's shoes. A heavy silence fell over the garden. Delores stood tall, with a dignity that made Richardson seem even smaller by comparison. Michael, she said softly, touching her son's arm. Let's go. This house isn't for us. The words hit Michael like a physical blow. After months of planning this surprise, everything was unraveling before his eyes. His mother, the woman who had never asked for anything for herself, who would sacrifice everything for him, now believed he had brought her here only to dream of something she could never have. Mom, he began, but Delores was already walking back toward the house, her rigid posture revealing how hurt she was. Michael cast one last, searing look at Richardson before following his mother. Thomas hurried after them, throwing apologetic glances over his shoulder. Back in the entrance hall, Delores grabbed her purse and headed for the door without saying a word. Michael watched, feeling a knot grow in his throat. Everything was going terribly wrong. The moment that should have been pure joy had turned into humiliation. Mom, wait, he pleaded, reaching her before she got to the door. Please. Delores stopped but didn't turn around immediately. When she finally did, There were tears held back in her eyes. "Why did you bring me here, Michael?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to keep it steady. "To show me a world I will never belong to? To make me dream of something that will never be mine?" The words hit Michael like arrows. "No, Mom, that's not it. I never—" "Do you know how many times in my life I've been treated like this?" she continued, the words spilling out like a dam finally breaking. "How many times I've been judged before I even opened my mouth? How many times I've been seen as less than just for being who I am?" Michael felt his own eyes burn. "I know, Mom, I know. Then why bring me here to be humiliated once again?" The pain in her voice was almost physical. "To remind me that no matter how much my son earns, no matter how much he achieves, to men like Richardson, I will always just be a poor woman who doesn't belong in their world." Michael took a step forward, gently holding his mother's shoulders. "You're wrong, Mom. So wrong." Thomas, who had quietly entered behind them, cleared his throat discreetly. "Mr. Jordan, should I call your driver? Or maybe—" "No," Michael answered firmly, never taking his eyes off his mother. "We're not going anywhere, not yet." At that moment, Richardson hurried in through the back door, his face a picture of controlled panic. "Mr. Jordan, Mrs. Jordan, please. There has been a terrible misunderstanding. I never intended to—" "Shut up," Michael interrupted, not even looking in his direction. His eyes remained locked on his mother's. "Mom, you're right about one thing. Men like Richardson exist everywhere. Small men who hide behind expensive suits and big words but are empty inside." Delores nodded silently, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "But you're wrong about something else," Michael continued, his voice softening. "Wrong about why I brought you here today." Slowly, he pulled an envelope from his inner pocket, the same envelope he had tried to hand over minutes earlier, before Richardson's disastrous interruption. "I didn't bring you here to dream of something you could never have," he said, holding out the envelope again. "I brought you here to give you something you have always deserved." Delores looked at the envelope hesitantly. "Take it, Mom," Michael encouraged her gently. "Please." With slightly trembling hands, Delores finally took the envelope. This time she fully opened it and pulled out all the documents. Her eyes moved slowly across the paper, stopping at the title, "Property Deed." And then, in the owner field, she read her own name, Delores Jordan. Her eyes widened, shifting quickly between the document and her son's face. "Michael, does this mean—" Richardson, who had stepped close enough to see what was happening, let out a strangled sound of surprise and horror at the same time. "Yes, Mom," Michael confirmed, a smile finally breaking through his tense expression. "This house is yours. Every inch of it. Every flower in the garden, every tile in the bathroom, every pot in that dream kitchen." "But how? When?" Delores could barely form complete sentences, her shock evident. "I bought it 3 weeks ago," Michael explained. "I wanted it to be a surprise. A way to give back for everything you've done for me." Delores looked at the documents again, then around the house, her house, as she now realized. The implications slowly started sinking in, and then her gaze fell on Richardson, who now looked like he was about to faint. "So," she said slowly, a new understanding giving strength to her voice, "if I understand correctly, Mr. Richardson, you just suggested that the owner of this house is not refined enough to live in it?" The silence that followed was deafening. Richardson's face took on a sickly pallor as the reality of his situation fully hit him. I, he stammered, unable to form a coherent response. Michael stated firmly, "My mother is not here to be judged by you or anyone else. She is here because I brought her to see her new home." The silence that followed was absolute. Delores blinked several times as if trying to process what she had just heard. Richardson visibly paled. Her new home?" the realtor stammered. "Yes," Michael responded, pulling an envelope from the inner pocket of his blazer. "The paperwork was signed last week. The property is already registered in Delores Jordan's name." He handed the envelope to Richardson, who opened it with trembling fingers. The official property transfer documents were there, stamped and signed, undeniable proof of what Michael had just declared. "But you never mentioned—" "I thought this was just an initial visit." The realtor stuttered, his previous arrogance completely dissolved. I wanted it to be a surprise for my mother, Michael explained, his voice controlled but carrying a steely undertone. What I didn't expect was for her to be treated with such disrespect in her own home. The emphasis on the last three words made Richardson shrink. Mr. Jordan, I sincerely apologize. If I had known, Mrs. Jordan has every right. I would never have. Your presence is no longer required, Michael interrupted, and it was not a request but a clear order. Leave the keys and the remaining documents on the entry table. My lawyer will contact your agency tomorrow. Richardson's face flickered between professional horror and personal fear. Being dismissed by Michael Jordan meant more than just losing a commission. It was a stain on his reputation that would never be erased in Chicago's exclusive real estate market. Certainly, Mr. Jordan. Once again, my deepest apologies, Mrs. Jordan, he murmured, backing toward the exit. But his words fell on deaf ears, because Delores Jordan was no longer paying attention to the realtor. She was staring at her son, her eyes slowly filling with tears as reality started settling into her consciousness. Michael, she whispered, her voice almost inaudible. What have you done? As the front door closed behind Richardson, the sound echoed through the now silent mansion. Michael stepped closer to his mother, taking her hands in his. An athlete's hands, holding the hands that had once cradled him, that had worked until they were calloused so he could have a future. I bought you the house of your dreams, Mom, he said simply, his voice softer than anyone outside his family had ever heard. Exactly as you always described it. Delores shook her head slowly, incredulous, her eyes sweeping across the grand entrance hall with its marble columns, the magnificent crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling, and the twin staircases curving up to the second floor. No, it can't be, she whispered. Michael, this is too much. Michael smiled, a genuine smile he rarely showed in public. Do you remember when I was 14 and you showed me that interior design magazine? You pointed to a house like this and said that one day, when you had saved enough, you'd have a big porch with a rocking chair where you could sit and watch the sunset. Delores covered her mouth with her hand, memories flooding her mind. You remember that? I remember everything, Mom. I remember how you'd come home at 10 at night from your second job and still find time to help me with my math homework. I remember how you saved up to buy me my first basketball shoes while wearing the same pair for years yourself. He gently led her through the hall toward the glass doors that opened to the back of the estate. As he pushed them open, a meticulously landscaped garden came into view, overlooking a serene lake. And there, exactly where the sun would set hours later, stood a grand wooden porch with a custom-made rocking chair, waiting for its new owner. Would you mind sitting outside for a bit? Michael asked softly. There's something I want to show you. Delores nodded, still in shock, allowing her son to guide her along the path of polished stones toward the porch. The air was scented with the fragrance of freshly planted flowers, lilies, Delores' favorite, and the gentle lapping of the lake's waves created a natural symphony. When they reached the porch, Michael helped his mother into the rocking chair. Only then, feeling the solid wood beneath her fingers, did Delores finally break down. The tears she had been holding back began to fall silently, her whole body trembling with emotion. I don't deserve this, she whispered between sobs. It's too much, Michael. It's too much. No, Mom, Michael said, kneeling before her so they were at eye level. It's not even close to enough. He took her hands again, and there was an intensity in his eyes that even his fiercest opponents on the court had never witnessed. Then he stood and walked to a small table beside the rocking chair, where a polished wooden box awaited. Michael picked it up and returned to his mother, placing it gently in her lap. Open it, he requested softly. With trembling fingers, Delores lifted the lid. Inside, resting on navy blue velvet, was a golden key with a small tag attached. Written by Michael's own hand, the words read, "For the woman who gave me the keys to the world." At that moment, Delores Jordan finally understood the magnitude of what was happening. This was not just a house. It was a symbol of everything she had sacrificed, of all the love she had poured into her children, of every sleepless night and exhausting workday. It was the recognition of a lifetime dedicated to family. Oh, Michael, she sobbed, unable to form coherent words. Her tear-blurred eyes looked at the son who had become not just a sports legend, but a man of immense character and gratitude. Michael sat on the porch step, at his mother's feet, just as he used to when he was a child, and wanted to hear one of her bedtime stories. For a few moments they sat in silence, simply absorbing the emotion of the moment. "You know," he finally spoke, his voice thoughtful as he gazed at the distant lake, "people always ask me about my greatest moments. They expect me to talk about championships, about Olympic medals." He paused, turning to look at his mother. "But they don't understand that no victory on the court compares to what you and Dad did for us." Delores tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she reached out and touched her son's face, the face known all over the world, the face printed on posters in millions of kids' bedrooms, but to her, always the face of the little boy she once cradled in her arms. "Do you remember when I got cut from the high school team?" Michael continued. "You found me crying in my room, and do you remember what you said?" Delores smiled through her tears. "I told you the only way to deal with defeat was to turn it into fuel." "Exactly. You said the difference between winners and losers wasn't talent, but the ability to get back up after every fall." Michael paused, his eyes shining with unspoken emotion. "I never forgot those words, Mom. They made me who I am." And then something extraordinary happened. Michael Jordan, the man who rarely showed vulnerability, the fierce competitor who channeled every emotion into the game, allowed a single tear to slip down his face. "This house, every brick, every piece of it, is nothing compared to what you gave me, what you gave all of us." Delores opened her arms, and her son, still her little boy in her heart, rose and embraced her. The hug was deep, filled with decades of love, sacrifice, and mutual pride. "When you were born," Delores whispered against Michael's shoulder, "I loved you with all my heart. I looked at you and promised that one day I would give you everything the world had to offer." Michael pulled back slightly, looking into his mother's eyes with a gentle smile. "And you did, Mom. You gave me so much more than a house could ever represent. You gave me principles, strength, determination. You taught me the value of hard work and perseverance." He paused, gesturing to the estate that stretched around them. "This is just a small part of what I owe you. Every brick of this house represents a sacrifice you made, a lesson you taught me, a moment when you put our happiness above your own." Delores looked down at the key in her hand, still in disbelief. "I still can't believe it," she murmured. "It feels like a dream." "It's not a dream, Mom," Michael smiled. "It's your home now. All the documents are in your name. The house is yours forever." He helped her up from the rocking chair, offering his arm in a gallant gesture that made her smile despite her tears. "And now," he said, a gleam of excitement in his eyes, "how about a full tour? I've been waiting weeks to show you every detail." Delores nodded, wiping her tears away with the back of her hand. "I would love that." As they walked back toward the house, arms linked, Delores looked at her son with a mixture of pride, love, and admiration. "You know," she said softly, "all the medals, all the trophies and records are wonderful, Michael. But the man you've become, that is my greatest pride." Michael smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that no sports victory had ever given him. "I learned from the best, Mom. I learned from the best." And so mother and son began the tour of the house. Not just a structure of walls and a roof, but a tangible symbol of a journey that had begun decades ago, when a young mother looked at her newborn son and promised to give him the best she could. A promise she had fulfilled beyond all expectations, and which, in an extraordinary twist of fate, was now being repaid in the most unexpected and heartfelt way. The sun began to set on the horizon, casting golden rays through the mansion's windows. Inside, Michael Jordan guided his mother from room to room, each space meticulously designed with her tastes in mind, each detail a silent tribute to a lifetime of unconditional love. And as the lights turned on automatically while day gave way to night, one thing became clear to everyone who witnessed this extraordinary moment. Some victories happen far from the spotlight, the crowds, and the cameras. Some victories are personal, profound, and eternal. And for Michael Jordan, surpassing all expectations on the basketball court was merely a prelude to his greatest achievement, honoring the woman who made it all possible. As they climbed the stairs to the second floor, Dolores' laughter, now mixed with exclamations of amazement at each new discovery, echoed through the house, instantly filling it with the one thing that would transform that magnificent structure into a true home: family love. Michael and Dolores reached the top of the marble staircase, their soft footsteps resonating through the vast hallway. Dolores paused for a moment, her hand still holding the golden key her son had gifted her. "We're just getting started, Mom." Michael smiled, a rare gentleness in his eyes that only his family knew. He led her to the master bedroom. When Dolores opened the closet doors, she couldn't contain a gasp of surprise. Inside, dozens of dresses, outfits, and coats hung, all in her exact size, all in colors and styles she had always admired but had rarely been able to buy for herself. "I hired a fashion consultant who worked with your best friend Gladys," Michael explained. "She told me about all the dresses you used to point out in magazines over the years, saying, 'One day when the boys are grown.'" Dolores touched the fabric of a navy blue dress, her hands visibly trembling. "I never thought," her voice faltered, "that this day would come," Michael finished gently. "Well, it has, Mom, and it's just beginning." Guiding her away from the closet, Michael led her to a side door. "There's one more thing you need to see." He opened the door, revealing a bathroom that looked more like a luxury spa. Italian marble covered the floor and walls, and a freestanding bathtub occupied a space near a window overlooking a private garden. "Remember when you worked that second job at the laundromat?" Michael asked, his voice soft with the memory. "You'd come home so tired you could barely stand. One night I heard you tell Dad that your biggest dream was to have a bathtub big enough to fully submerge in, with bath salts and candles all around." Dolores covered her mouth with her hands, tears now freely streaming down her wrinkled face. Every detail, every memory Michael had preserved and turned into reality was a tribute to a lifetime of unconditional love. "The drawers are filled with bath salts, essential oils, and all those products you saw in commercials," he continued. "And there's a heated floor system. Your feet will never be cold after a bath again." It was a seemingly small detail, but one filled with meaning. How many times had she complained about cold feet during Chicago winters while cutting back on heating costs so she could buy sports equipment for Michael and his brothers? "Come," Michael said softly, noticing that his mother was on the verge of being overwhelmed by emotion. "There's so much more to see." For the next 30 minutes, they walked through the mansion together. Each room revealed more surprises, more proof of the meticulous care Michael had put into planning every detail. In the spacious kitchen, with its granite countertops and state-of-the-art appliances, Dolores stopped in front of a particular cabinet that Michael opened for her. Inside, carefully arranged, were the same porcelain dishes she had admired in a department store window when Michael was 12. "I never bought them because they were too expensive," she whispered, picking up a plate with reverent care. "I told myself it was a waste when we had perfectly good dishes at home." "Well, now you have both," Michael smiled. "The old ones are stored in a box in the basement if you want them. But I thought that maybe, after all these years, you deserve to have what you really wanted." In the library, Dolores found not only shelves filled with new books, but also a special collection of worn and familiar volumes. "My books!" she exclaimed, approaching a particular shelf where the volumes she had accumulated over decades were carefully arranged. "How did you bring them here?" "James and Larry helped me," Michael explained, referring to his brothers. "We wanted you to feel at home immediately, to know that this isn't just a new, unfamiliar house, but your home." In a small office adjacent to the library, Michael revealed another surprise. Framed on the wall was the first paycheck she had received from the textile factory where she had worked for 17 years. "I found this among your keepsakes," he explained when he saw the surprise on her face. "You always said you kept it to remind us where we came from." Dolores touched the frame with trembling fingers. $173.42, she recited from memory, "for 2 weeks of work." Michael nodded, his own throat tightening with emotion. "And you saved every penny you could. Skipped lunch so you could give us full dinners. Wore the same coat for years so we could have new clothes for school." They continued down the hallway, passing elegantly decorated guest rooms, cozy living spaces, and even a home theater where Michael explained that she could watch her favorite old movies on the big screen. When they reached a private door at the end of the first-floor hallway, Michael stopped, a mysterious smile on his face. This, he said, might be the most special room of all. He opened the door, revealing a space that made Delores clasp her hands over her chest. It wasn't grand like the other rooms, but it was warm and intimate. A modern sewing machine occupied a corner near a window, surrounded by neatly arranged baskets of fabrics in all kinds of colors and textures. A large table dominated the center of the room, perfect for cutting patterns. On the walls, shelves displayed an organized collection of threads, buttons, and every imaginable sewing and crafting supply. "Your studio," Michael said softly. "Remember how you used to say that when you retired, you'd finally have time to sew again? To make quilts and clothes, not because we needed to save money, but because you truly loved creating." Delores couldn't respond. Her legs felt weak under the weight of her emotions, and Michael gently guided her to a comfortable armchair positioned perfectly to overlook the garden. "The natural light is perfect for sewing," he explained, "and we installed the best lamps for when it gets dark. Your eyes won't get as tired as they used to when you sewed our clothes at night after everyone had gone to bed." It was this last detail that finally broke the last barriers of Delores' composure. She collapsed into the chair, deep sobs shaking her small frame. Michael knelt beside her, holding her hands, allowing her to release decades of pent-up emotion. "You remember," she finally managed to say through tears, "that night, you must have been about 11 years old, when you found me sewing your school uniform at 3 in the morning?" Michael nodded, his own vision blurring with the memory. "You had worked a double shift, you were exhausted, but there you were, sewing because I had torn my uniform and needed it for school the next day. You asked me why I wasn't sleeping," Delores continued, wiping her tears. "And I said, you said that mothers can't sleep while their children still have unmet needs," Michael finished, his voice thick with emotion. "I never forgot those words, Mom. Never." They remained like that for a few moments in silence, each absorbing not just the magnitude of the gift, but the deep meaning behind it, the recognition of a lifetime of selfless sacrifice and unconditional love. Finally, Michael stood up, extending his hand to his mother. "There's one more place I want to show you." He led her back downstairs and through the French doors that opened to the rear of the estate. The sun was almost completely below the horizon now, painting the sky in dramatic shades of pink, orange, and purple. They walked along a stone path that wound through meticulously landscaped gardens until they reached a small circular structure surrounded by rose bushes in full bloom. It was a white gazebo, covered in flowering vines with comfortable benches facing the lake. In the center, a small stone table held something covered by a velvet cloth. "The garden will be maintained by a team, but I left this little space for you," Michael explained. "I know how much you love gardening, so these rose bushes are yours to tend if you want, or you can simply enjoy them." Delores took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the roses, her favorites, of course, as Michael guided her to one of the benches. The setting sun cast an almost magical glow over the distant lake. "This is the perfect place to watch the sunset," Michael said softly. "And for this," he lifted the velvet cloth from the table, revealing a leather-bound photo album. Delores picked it up with curiosity, opening to the first page. Immediately, her eyes filled with tears again. There was an old photo of her, very young, holding newborn Michael in her arms. "James and Larry helped me gather all the family photos," Michael explained as she turned the pages with reverence. "There are 6 decades of our history here. The pages told the story not just of Michael Jordan, the basketball legend, but of the Jordan family, the modest homes they had lived in, the simple yet love-filled Christmases, the school games, the graduations, the everyday moments that wove the fabric of their lives. And through it all, there was Delores, the gravitational center that held the family together, always putting her children first, always working tirelessly to give them the best she could." "Look at this." Michael pointed to a particular photo. It showed Delores, much younger, asleep in a chair, a basket of laundry at her feet, a half-ironed school shirt still on the ironing board. "Dad took this one," he explained gently. "You had worked 16 hours straight and literally passed out from exhaustion while ironing our school clothes." Delores touched the photo, memories of those hard but purposeful days flooding her mind. "I look at this picture, Michael continued. And I see the true meaning of strength, Mom. It's not about how many points you score or how many championships you win. It's about getting up every morning for decades, no matter how tired you are, and continuing to fight for the ones you love. When they reached the last page of the album, Dolores found not a photograph, but a letter, handwritten by Michael himself. She looked at him, a silent question in her eyes. "Read it," he encouraged gently. With trembling hands, Dolores adjusted her glasses and began to read the words her son had written, especially for this moment. "Dear Mom, how do you put into words a gratitude too immense to be contained by letters on a page? How do you properly thank the woman who sacrificed her own dreams so that I could fulfill mine? The world knows me as Michael Jordan, the basketball player. They see the trophies, the medals, the records. What they don't see are the hands that cradled me when I cried, that held mine when I was afraid, that worked until they were calloused so that I could have chances you never had. This house is not a gift, Mom. It's a debt being partially repaid. It is a tangible acknowledgement that every basket I ever made, every victory I ever celebrated, has its roots in the lessons you taught me. Hard work, perseverance, integrity, gratitude. When the world calls me the greatest, I smile politely, knowing the truth that only our family knows. That the true greatness in our family has always been you, in your quiet strength, in your unwavering love, in your refusal to give up even when times were hardest. This house is yours, Mom, not because you need it, but because you deserve something beautiful and lasting that reflects the beauty and permanence of your love for us. With all my love and eternal gratitude, Michael." When Dolores finished reading, she could no longer see the words through the tears blurring her vision. The sun had finally dipped below the horizon, and the first stars were beginning to dot the twilight sky. "Michael," she finally managed to say, her voice breaking with emotion, "I never imagined I would live to see something like this." He smiled, taking her hands in his. "I know, Mom. You were too busy imagining wonderful things for us." Dolores looked at her son, not Michael Jordan, the global superstar, the billionaire, the sports legend, but her boy, the child with dreams in his eyes whom she had raised to be a man of character and substance. "You know what makes me the most proud?" she asked softly. "What?" "It's not this house, though it's beyond magnificent. It's not the championships or medals. It's the man you have become. A man who remembers where he came from. A man who understands that the true measure of success is not what you achieve, but what you give back." She stood, and Michael did the same. Under the rapidly darkening sky, now dotted with stars that seemed to shine especially for them, mother and son embraced. A hug that held decades of love, sacrifice, triumphs, and shared trials. "Thank you for giving me strong roots and wings to fly, Mom," Michael whispered. Dolores closed her eyes, absorbing the moment, knowing that in all the years of struggle and sacrifice, she could never have dreamed of a reward as sweet as this. Not the house itself, but the knowledge that she had raised a son who valued not just his own achievements, but the journey and the people who had helped him get there. As they walked back toward the house, her house now, arms linked beneath the starry sky, Delores Jordan felt a sense of fulfillment that transcended the initial shock of the surprise. It was the deep feeling of a life lived with purpose, of sacrifices acknowledged, of love repaid in abundance. The mansion's lights glowed warmly against the growing darkness, like a beacon guiding them home. But Dolores knew, just as Michael did, that a true home had never been about bricks and mortar, marble columns, or crystal chandeliers. The true home was right there, in the sacred space between mother and son, built with materials far more enduring than any mansion. Unconditional love, selfless sacrifice, and the recognition that, in the end, what truly matters is not the possessions we accumulate, but the lives we touch and the lessons we pass on. As they crossed the threshold, Dolores took one last look at the starry sky above. "James," she whispered, thinking of her late husband, "you should see the sun we raised." And somewhere beyond those stars, she felt that he truly did, and that, like her, he was immensely proud, not just of Michael's achievements, but of the man he had become. A man who, at the height of his success and unprecedented fame, still remembered to come home and honor the hands that had lifted him up. As the mansion doors gently closed behind them, a new era began for the Jordan family, an era where past sacrifices were honored, long-deferred dreams finally flourished, and where love, the strongest and most enduring of all building materials, remained the foundation upon which everything else was built. And for all who knew their story, a powerful message resonated, that there is no greater success than remembering where we come from, honoring those who helped us along the way, and using our own blessings to bless those we love. In the quiet of that starry night, in a lakeside mansion that was now a home, this message found its purest and most moving expression. And no championship, no million-dollar contract, no scoring record could ever compare to the feeling Michael Jordan experienced as he watched his mother finally receive something in return after a lifetime of giving. If this story moved you, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more inspiring stories like this. Comment below what you thought about this emotional moment between Michael Jordan and his mother. Your support makes all the difference.